Hey folks, I'm just coming back and doing that additional review I promised on the Jones short wheelbase, because I've already done a long wheelbase review of a size large. You can see that on my page. It's a size large steel with a titanium truss fork in the front. So I picked up this short wheelbase Jones. It is a space frame version, size medium. I'm about 5'11". The size range on these mediums is anywhere between, I think, 5'2" and almost 6 foot. So there's quite a wide range of heights that this bike could fit, or that could ride this bike comfortably. It's one of the reasons why I like it, is because when people come and visit, if I'm riding the long wheelbase, or they want to ride the long wheelbase, I could hop on this, or they could hop on this bike if they're like significantly shorter than me, and still be able to ride this comfortably and effectively. So the space frame allows that, because if you look, it has, quite a low standover height compared to the diamond frame. You can see the sloping tubes here, which allow for people that are quite a bit shorter to feel comfortable on the bike. So that is a cool feature of the space frame. The other features obviously involve design, aesthetics. I happen to think the space frame is really cool design, particularly the way that the seat stays are curved in the back. A lot of this bike was originally designed. I believe, in titanium for more vertical compliance, and the design was the purpose of the design was to create more vertical compliance in the frame. Whether or not you feel as much of that on the steel frame is, I guess, still up for debate. It does have a great ride. I want to talk a little bit about the differences between the long wheelbase and short wheelbase, because I think a lot of folks are interested in that. And again, this is kind of like just a regular review from regular people. I'm not in any way attached to any advertising for Jones or for any other company for that matter, and I'm just doing this. I'm just a regular rider who rides recreationally, and I also commute back and forth to work, although that's been on hold because of the pandemic. But so I'm taking some of this time to just put together the short wheelbase review. So first of all, just a quick overview on the setup here. I'm rocking the regular Jones bars. You can take a look. I have a pack there that you can set up. I use this bike a lot for single track riding, and I do that on local trails here. During the pandemic, I mask up, I get out there, and I try to go the trail where there's not a lot of folks, and during times when not a lot of people are there. So this bike gets a lot of single track usage. And if you take a look, I also have a dropper post on here. I have the PMW Coast dropper, which gives you some suspension as well as drop. I believe it's around 80 millimeter drop, 80 to 100 millimeter, depending on which size you get. But I believe this one has about 80 millimeter drop, and that works for me just fine. I don't need much more than that, especially given my height and my skill level. I'm fine with that amount of drop, that amount of travel. So I'm rocking the Pacific Northwest dropper, and you can see here I got your basic SRAM GX drive components. So if you look at drivetrain components, if you take a look, you got a 1x11 here, 1142 in the back, GX rear derail, 11 speed over here, and you can take a look over here, the GX crankset. I got a Sunrace cassette in the rear, which works just fine for me, and the price is around $60 to $70, which is cool, because when you look at these bikes, man, they can get really expensive to put together, especially when you're building a wheel set for them. We'll get to that in a second. You notice I have a fat front end here, and I have a 650B rear setup plus. So as far as the brakes go, I'm just using XT brakes here, hydraulic, with a GX shifter. I know I'm mixing components there. It's just what works, and also what I had available in my box full of like spare bike parts, and that's what this frame ended up having. I use Crank Brothers mallets for the pedals. That's just a preference thing. I prefer them to Shimano. I like a little bit more float when I ride, because I got some knee problems, and they've been working for me for years. As far as the wheel set, I had this custom built by a bike shop out in New York. Well, actually, the rear wheel is part of a custom build that I had a friend of mine back in New York build for me up at Peak Bikes in Queens, where I originally used to live. They do great work over there. So he built me a wheel set, 650B. Remember, this bike over here can fit both a 29 and a 650B set, depending on the tire sizes you use. So that's one cool thing about the SWB Jones, is that you have a little bit more range of wheel sizes that you can work with. So you can use the 29. You can run it about, I think the max is 2.6 on like a mountain bike, heavily treaded tire. I have definitely run 2.8s in 29 on this with like a V Speedster slick. So I've run the short wheelbase with a 29 by 2.8. So I guess technically that might be considered plus. Anything above 2.6, some people say is plus. I don't know about that. But 2.8, definitely I've run this with slicks. And I don't think I could get fenders in there, but it definitely is. There's still a significant amount of clearance left. And if you're just riding road or gravel, it works just fine. So you could squeeze 29 by 2.8s. Right now I got 650B on the rear by 3. Terravale Coronado, right? The extra supple casing. And sometimes I run the same thing in the front, but recently I had an extra, my other brother Daryl Surley rim from my ice cream truck that I have. And it's an 80 mil rim. And I decided to throw a 4.0 Coronado on the front tire and set this up with a fat front. At first I thought that might, affect the handling in a weird way, but so many people have really raved about the fat front end. Jeff, I know, recommends it if you're riding a little bit more technical stuff with ruts and kind of rocky terrain, which I tend to do a decent amount of now because I'm not riding suspension bikes anymore like I used to, so I figured I'd give it a shot. So I did set it up with the fat front end, and I have a setup here that's running about a little bit less than 10 PSI front and rear because I've been doing kind of mixed terrain riding with it lately. So a little bit of road, mostly gravel, and then going into single track. So maybe half single track, half gravel, because I just been riding from my house 2 trails where I want to go instead of taking it with me in the car. So that's pretty much how the setup is on this bike as far as the wheels go and componentry. I have a specialized toupe saddle on here. It's not bad. I mean, it's what I had laying around. You can get used to it. That all comes down to preference. But with the suspension post, it does take a little bit of the buzz off the bike. And if your seat isn't that comfortable, the suspension post kind of compensates for that. I should do, and I will do, a review on the suspension post alone. The Pacific Northwest, or PNW Coast Dropper. I'll do a separate review on that too. But getting back here to the Jones SWB, this again, the steel Jones SWB Spaceframe version. Paint job's amazing. It looks way better in person than it does on the website. I wasn't sure about how that was going to look, but I actually like it more in person than I did on the website. The blue is really nice, kind of like a pastel blue. Reminds me of the water in Puerto Rico, where I spent many of my summers. So I appreciate that color. Puts me in a good mood, and it definitely pops nice if you set up the bike with black components, and it's got a nice aesthetic too with the curves of the space frame. So it is a nice looking bike, no doubt. But let's get down to the nitty gritty functional stuff and talk about it in relationship to the LWB. Straight up, this bike handles incredibly well. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I'm talking about the SWB, a lot of people look for the SWB because of the kind of handling that it has. And that doesn't mean that the LWB doesn't handle well. It's a different kind of handling. If you're looking for if you're doing a lot of techie riding, you're looking to do stuff where you're going to be doing some pretty cool, intense cornering. You're going to be weaving in and out of obstacles. You want to get the front wheel up real nice. I mean, this bike this bike out of the 2 Jones is the bike for you. It's so easy to wheelie. You can wheelie this bike all day long. The front end gets up so easy. Very easy to bunny hop or the Bronco, whatever it is you call it. I know back in New York we used to use both terms. J-hop too is another way, sort of, all those. Very easy to get this bike up in the air and play with it, right? Super playful bike. My bike, the way that I have the gearing set up, it accelerates quite well too. But the number one thing about this bike in relationship to the LWB is the kind of handling that you're dealing with. It's very different. Now, the long wheelbase, it just exudes stability, and it has surprisingly precise handling for such a stable bike. This bike is just all about technical handling capabilities. It is so much fun to ride. If you ever checked out Russ from Pathless Pedals review of it, I think he was using it for different kind of riding than me, but he says similar things about the bike. It is a blast to ride. It is equally as comfortable in terms of body position as the long wheelbase, although you are going to feel more trail chatter through the bike, through the ground, with the shorter wheelbase than you do on the Jones. The Jones, you are sitting kind of between the wheels a little bit more, so you're feeling less of that buzz. I do think the Jones long wheelbase for longer rides is more comfortable. I've done longer rides with both of these bikes, 25, 30 miles, nothing too crazy, but just enough to get a sense of how they feel after a decent length ride, gravel ride. So they're both fine for that. You can get away with either one of them and not come away, aching, neck pain, elbow pain, back pain, wrist pain. I didn't have an issue with any of that. I did prefer the long wheelbase, though. I felt a little bit more comfortable on longer rides, especially when I got tired. I still felt like I had control over the bike, especially when I've done longer than 25, 30 mile rides, 60, 70 stuff on the long wheelbase. Even when I felt exhausted, that bike still held lines pretty well and stayed under control, where this bike is certainly more reactive. So that's a good and a bad, depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking to do a lot more single track riding and more technical riding and just kind of whipping through trails, I love the short wheelbase for that. It is more fun than the long wheelbase in those kind of trails. I enjoy riding the long wheelbase on single track, and it definitely holds its own, especially for a bike as stable and with such a long wheelbase. But the short wheelbase is something special in those trails. It's just magical out there. The kind of handling that it's able to do, or the kind of responsiveness that it offers the rider. So the short wheelbase in comparison to the long wheelbase for that kind of riding, to me, is a no-brainer, especially if you like throwing your bike around a lot and you like, really technical, twisty kind of riding. Again, the long wheelbase is great as well, but this is definitely going to give you a more surgical, precise feel on the trails and allow you to kind of flick the bike around in ways that the long wheelbase cannot. That doesn't mean you can't throw the other bike around. Long wheelbase is great. I since moved back to a medium on my long wheelbase, and I can kind of ride the large and the medium, but for the kind of riding I'm doing, I'm appreciating the medium a lot more than the large. If I was doing longer rides, the other way around. But either way, the medium Jones short wheelbase is a solid pick if you like doing non-suspended, single track, techie kind of riding, and you want a super responsive bike. This is it. As far as some of you folks that might be worried about riding in these kind of trails without suspension, I don't know too many trails that I would ride where I need suspension. I know people say that, and sometimes it's like an ego thing, like I don't need suspension, because a real skilled rider doesn't need that. That's not where I'm coming from at all. I'm just thinking that with the tire size you do get, and the rim size, you do get a kind of dampening from the way that the tires make contact with the ground. If you have your pressure right, you do take a lot of buzz out of the trail. And I think for the most part, you can do pretty much most single track riding without suspension, unless you're starting to deal with a whole bunch of jumps and some of the more man-made features that you find in mountain bike parks and stuff like that. I have taken this bike to mountain bike parks, and there's certain things I won't do, but there's certain things I will. And I have taken this bike off 3 to 4, even 5 foot drops to transition, and I've been fine with it. I've done the same with the long wheelbase. I think I have a video of doing a 4 or 5 foot drop with the long wheelbase, and you know, just I mean, you feel it. It's a steel, you know, rigid bike, but the tires do take a great deal of sting out of it. And the other thing I would say is that they're so well balanced that even when you're a little bit off, when you're getting air on some stuff, the bike almost seems to self-correct because of the way that it's carefully balanced by design, and it's very easy to land properly with these bikes, both long wheelbase and short wheelbase. But the long wheelbase just feels like a glove. And another thing I would say about the short wheelbase just feels like a glove. And one thing I would say about it is you really feel like you're in the bike rather than on the bike. That's more true for the short wheelbase for me than the long wheelbase. It's not to say that the long wheelbase doesn't have that sort of feel, but in the case of the short wheelbase, I think that's immediately apparent to the rider, that you do feel like you're in the bike, and the center of gravity feels a lot lower and is a lot lower when you're riding this bike, and the handling, you know, really shows that. You just feel like you're attached to, you're kind of on rails when you're taking turns on this bike, and that it's just cutting through the trails, cutting through corners, and really gets a flowy feel to it quickly, and it feels very balanced, and that your weight is centered very low. I appreciate that feel for a bike that I'm using for single track techie riding a lot, especially when it's twisty and it's fast. As far as the fat front, I'm sold on it. I find very little difference in the precision handling that the front end offers on this bike, and it offers surgical handling in the front. But with the fat front wheel, a lot of people think that some of that is diminished. Whatever Jones has done here with the geometry, that's not the case. In fact, you hardly notice a change in the way that the bike steers and maneuvers with the fat front wheel. You do notice that you have more traction and more shock absorption in the front than you had before with the 650B 3.0 Plus setup in front and rear. So to me, so far, I've noticed all the benefits and none of the drawbacks of riding a fat front wheel in the short wheelbase. So that's something to think about. I ride it both ways. If I'm doing more of a street ride, I'll throw the other tire on and I'll throw the other wheel on and just ride a matching set front and rear. But in most of the single track riding, even the gravel stuff, I don't mind the fat front at all. In fact, I prefer it when you're riding through ruts and more technical stuff. You know, the wheel doesn't get stuck. You have a little bit more shock absorption in the front, and you get over stuff pretty fast. And it's a good matchup with the 3.0 650B and in the rear, and the front, the 26 by 4.0 actually are almost perfectly even. So it's a good setup. Again, highly recommend this bike for someone thinking about riding fully rigid, mountain biking fully rigid, especially for single track use. But I would not hesitate for a second to take this on a backpacking trip. The only thing I would say is you don't have much frame space, but you can pack these up. If you look online, you can see a whole bunch of people packing up space frames quite well. If you get a pair of truss fork packs for the front, you can also get a space frame bag off Jones's website that fits perfectly in the, I don't want to call it well, it is still kind of a triangle, right? So it is, you can find one that fits perfectly for the frame space of the short wheelbase and short wheelbase space frame. And you shouldn't have any issue with that. And of course, you could rock a rack on this thing. I think it looks ridiculous, but if function is what matters, and often that's what matters to me, you definitely could put a rear rack on here. You have, if you can take a look right here, you can see that you have some mounting points here for a rear rack, as well as some mounting points for whatever it is you want to put on here besides a rack. And you also have some mounting points for, okay, here's another mounting point here for fenders, and then right here for fenders, and then for a rear rack as well. So that is a really cool feature. And if you're thinking about doing some touring, sorry about the thumb. Actually having some shoulder pain from a wipeout I had, so my maneuverability isn't as good as it usually is. So yes, you could take this thing on some bike packing rides and do some overnight stuff, no problem. The frame is just bulletproof strong. Feels great on the rides. You can definitely load it up without any issue. If you're looking to do that, though, you might want to consider the diamond frame SWB would work better because you'd have more frame capacity if you want to pack it up, more water bottle mounts, etc. This one does have a water bottle mount inside the frame. If you take a look here, you even got 3 mounting points. You could rock one of those larger water bottles in there, or like a salsa anything cage, and on the bottom you also have 3 mounting points underneath the frame. The other really cool thing about this bike, or at least if you buy the custom frames from Jones, or should I say the non-complete bike frames from Jones, apart from being lighter and heat treated, they also come with an eccentric bottom bracket. Now, why is that cool? Well, you can adjust the height of your pedals in that way, and you can also change the sort of fore and aft of the crankset itself in relationship to the seat post to sort of fine-tune your comfort and adjustment. Now, if you want to lower the pedals, right? If you want to drop the center of gravity a little bit, that's beneficial for certain kinds of riding. Or if you want to raise it where you're worried about pedal strikes, you have that option as well. I actually do use the bottom bracket, and I do play around with it and change the settings sometimes depending on my setup. So that's something to consider if you're thinking about getting the complete rather than building up your own frame. I recommend that if you have the money, and that's a big part of setting these bikes up, to go with the frame setup and build your own. But if not, you're going to get 90% of the quality with the complete bike setup. You're just going to only be able to buy the diamond frame as far as I can remember in the complete bike setup, not the space frame. So that's something to consider. But all in all, depending on the riding you want to do, the SWB is a phenomenal bike. I highly recommend it. And for those of us, again, like I spoke about in my last review on the long wheelbase, for those of us who have issues with back pain, neck pain, wrist pain, elbow pain, yes, the Jones bars are great. I ride them no problem on my Surly ice cream truck as much as I do on my Jones. I have them on all my bikes except for my drop bar bike. But I would say it's not just the bars, it's the geometry of the bike, the way that your body position is in relationship to the frame design, or because of the frame design, it plays a role in offering comfort that other bikes, similar rigid bikes, similar in terms of competitors offer. So I would say that they are significantly more comfortable than other rigid bikes that I have ridden in the same class or category. And you could probably compare this bike to something like the Surly Karate Monkey as an example. I find this bike to be, and I've had a bunch of Surlys, and I've had an Ogre, I've had a Karate Monkey, I had a Krampus, and I would say that this bike handles better than all of those bikes. I know people will give me pushback on that, but this is my opinion from riding all 3 of those bikes. It handles better than all of those bikes and is infinitely more comfortable than every one of them. One of the things I can't stand about Surly's is how low their front ends can be. For those of us who have neck and back problems, that sucks. You can get around that by grabbing a frame, and you still have a lot of steerer tube showing, and you can get those bars up high and throw a more comfortable alt bar on, and those bikes can be really good too. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to throw Surly under the bridge or the Karate Monkey under the bridge or the Krampus. I actually like those bikes. I have an ice cream truck, and that's exactly what I did with the front end. And I have a pair of Jones risers on that, and it rides amazing. So, but just from the sort of setup, geometry, the precision handling that you get from the truss fork here, the wheelbase, the The design of the rear end is this bike. When you point this bike, it goes exactly where you want, and it's like the rear end disappears right into the turn. So it's a phenomenal set. It's a phenomenal design. It's a beautiful design, and most importantly, it's a very functional and comfortable design. That the low standover height is something that folks appreciate, even if they're not that tall. It's just a better feeling of security for a lot of riders, especially if you're riding in kind of wet, slippery terrain. For me, I don't know. I don't notice it that much, but I do say, I would say that people who ride this bike, who come visit me, that's one of the first things they say, how much they appreciate the standover height and how that makes them feel a bit more secure on the bike. And that's important for a lot of riders, especially new riders who want to feel comfortable and get into the sport, that they feel secure on the bike and they feel stable. And I think this bike offers that, and also offers, like, it's almost telepathic in its handling. It's just like you think of it and the bike does it. So it does, you really feel a sort of unique connection with this bike and the handling that it provides. And I think it's like I said about the Jones long wheelbase, it is one of the best rigid mountain bikes. Now, non-suspension corrected, right? One of the best intended to be rigid mountain bikes on the market, if not the best. And I say that for handling and comfort, right? And of course, aesthetics is important to me, not as important as handling, function, and that sort of thing, but it is a beautiful bike. And I think you'll be very happy if you pick one up. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments below. I'll try my best to get back to them and as soon as I can. And I will be posting up another review of my Surly ice cream truck, which I've been doing some summer riding on. And I want to get that out there for those folks who think fat bikes are just about snow and sand. Well, I've decided to see whether or not there's truth to that, and you'll see in the next review I do where I stand on that issue. I hope this helps folks that are considering buying a Jones. There's not a lot of reviews on Jones out there, apart from the ones that Jones himself does. This is not a fancy review. This is kind of just a sort of introduction to Jones, the Jones short wheelbase. I've done one for the long wheelbase as well. And I hope this helps folks that are considering getting a Jones. And maybe they're deciding between a Surly and a Jones and a Salsa. They don't know where to go. And I hope this helps push them in the direction of a Jones, because I do recommend them over both the Salsa and Surly bikes in this sort of comparable or equivalent bike models. Now, what those are depends if you're talking about short wheelbase or long wheelbase. I think the long wheelbase, the Fargo, is kind of like in that class to some degree. As far as Surly goes, you're probably looking at the Ogre, but maybe even one of their trail bikes as well as a competitor with the long wheelbase Jones, because the long wheelbase is, I think, so versatile it can sort of fit in multiple categories, like Surly's. But I do think they are superior design, and I've thought a lot about that, and I've rode a lot of their models from both companies, and I'm a big Surly lover, of course, but I just think that this particular product, the short wheelbase and also the long wheelbase, are better options, but when it comes to budget, that gets complicated. So I hope this helps, and again, any questions, post them below. And I guess this concludes the sort of basic, normal, regular rider review, intro review of the Jones Spaceframe steel short wheelbase bike. Thank you very much.